Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I believe that the Russian leaders were listening to the Rolling Stones when they said, "Yes, time is on my side." Yes, it is. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and it's a beautiful Tuesday morning. Let's talk about what's happening. In we got a lot of people in Ukraine regarding the Ukrainian conflict. Of course, there are a lot of people. There's Brian Berletich over at the New Atlas. He can give you all the details of what's happening on the battlefield Wednesday morning. Of course, I'm going to have Scott Ritter. He's going to give you an update. The Duran, can't miss the Duran. They give you all kinds of good information about Bakhmut and places that I really struggle to pronounce at times. But let's talk politically and philosophically, right? In watching this war, it's interesting watching the how things have changed from the beginning philosophically from the side of the Russians. And again, as everyone constantly says, the Russian Ministry of Defense and the General Staff, they don't call Garland Nixon and say, "This what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing next." So I just kind of observe and try to figure out what's going on. And this is my take on it, strictly my take, but I think I have some substantive uh, uh, um, information to make some pretty good claims. Okay, so let's move forward. Um, Certainly, it appears that when the Russians initially entered into conflict with Ukraine, they had designs upon a shorter conflict. It certainly appears, based on everything that I've seen, and again, I'm making some assumptions, but it appears that they had done some intelligence gathering and they had worked on some deals, and they thought maybe they could go into Ukraine, they could make some deals with the local leaders, they could make some deals with people, they could come in and they could, as Sun Tzu said, Bruce Lee, all of them, the best battle that you fight is that you win is the one that you don't have to fight in. That they thought they could go in and do a minimal of fighting, a maximum of politicking, and get this thing done. I think that they went in with that thought. And I think there was great concern about how this would affect their economy. And so Vladimir Putin was very concerned, and I think wisely so, that in the event that the actions that were taken had a dramatic negative effect on the Russian economy, that it would be difficult to hold long-term support amongst the population. Keep in mind something that I've argued all along, and that is that the way the Russian administration currently moves is, it appears to me, is they wait until they have what you call in business market insistence, right? They waited, they didn't, because if you understand what's been happening, the dynamics regarding Ukraine, regarding the Donbass and Donetsk and all of that area, Lugansk and Donetsk, if you understand the politics behind it, for years now, a lot of Russians were angry because they felt that the Russian leadership should have moved sooner. So what the Russian leadership did was they waited until there was an uproar. They waited until such time as the people in Russia were screaming, saying, "Why aren't you going in enough?" And they said, "Okay, we'll do it." And it's a different way of getting buy-in. One way of getting buy-in is to explain to the people, this is what we're going to do and why. Another way of getting buy-in is what the US does, propaganda. You simply lie to your people. You say, we've got to go in because we got to save the women, LGBT, minority, marginalized groups, blah, 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 blah. You tell a bunch of outright bald-faced lies. You propagandize the people and you move forward and do what the hell you want, because who cares what the people think anyway? You're totalitarian leaders. You don't really care what the people think. It's not like you're responding to the needs of the voters. If you're responding to the needs of the voters, you'd look at like homelessness and healthcare and jobs and all the other things that people are concerned about. That ain't happening. So from the perspective of, say, a Biden administration, a Bush or Obama administration, you just simply lie to the people until they're complicit, until they go along with it. And then sooner or later they'll figure out, but who cares? You're going to have a new lie. Well, it was interesting. What the Russian leaders appeared to do is just wait, 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 wait until the cries for action built to a crescendo. And once the people were screaming, you got to go in. And at the same time, the US Empire, even then, at the same time, the US Empire, at the time the war started, one of the things you have to understand is that the Azov battalion and the Nazi battalions were arrayed around the Russian speaking areas of Ukraine, and they increased their attacks on civilian areas using various types of bombings, artillery, etc. And so it's a combination. It was the war started a combination of the Russians having had enough, realizing that it's futile to try to work out a deal, and the Biden administration literally upping the ante, causing the getting their proxies on the borders of the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine to increase the attacks and kind of bait the Russians in. All of those things came together. They to a confluence. Boom, we get the Ukrainian conflict. Now, as I said, the Russians, it certainly appears that they wanted a shorter conflict. In fact, within a month or two in, they were working heavily diplomatically, which again, if you understand Russians and that's, if you understand how Russians do things, they don't just do war or diplomacy. They do war along with diplomacy, right? So they're doing war and they're doing diplomacy, but they didn't send in the big dogs. They didn't send in a lot. They sent in a minimalist force, to be quite frank, a very powerful but minimalist force that was backed with a lot of resources. So they didn't send in a ton of soldiers. They were probably outnumbered 4 or 5 to 1 at least. But what they did was they had a lot of missiles, they had a lot of firepower, air power, things of that nature. So the soldiers that they sent in did have a lot of military resources with which to attack, to counterattack, and to hold off attacks. So the Ukrainians had them outnumbered, but they couldn't just go running into artillery fire and bombers. All right, and missile strikes, etc. So over the course of time, we can shorten this up. Over the course of time, it seems to have become apparent to the Russians what was going on. Number one, that the U.S. empire was, well, they already knew this, wholly in charge, fully in charge, that the EU had no say. And the EU leaders accepted that the EU leaders accepted, we will do what we're told throughout this conflict, regardless of how bad it hurts our region, our economy, politically, it doesn't matter. So the Russians realized that the US was fully in charge and that the EU and NATO is purely, completely a puppet organization. The U.S. has taken absolute control of both foreign, cultural, economic, and foreign policies for the EU and NATO. Nothing there. So they realized, okay, we're dealing with the pure, and the Biden administration, pure neocons, pure ideologue neocons, and they want to destroy Russia. And they are more than happy to sacrifice every human being in Ukraine to try in their attempt to destroy Russia. And they're also more than happy to sacrifice every human being, the economy, the culture, everything in Europe to try to destroy Russia, or even if it's just weaken Russia. Ukraine and the EU are no different to the US, and that is these are tools. These are pawns on a chessboard to be sacrificed. We're the queen, we're the king. You sacrifice your pawns to protect the queen and king. The Russians understood early that's where the US is. These are puppets. They also understood early that the European leaders knew what was going on and were complicit, that their job was to pacify the European people, to give the European people the illusion that they were part of the decision-making process, the illusion that there was some kind of a democratic governance going on in Europe, when in fact Europe is now sacrificial lambs to be sacrificed to the altar of U.S. hegemony, right? So the job of the Europeans, hold off the people as long as you can. That's and it's clear that's what this has become. The job of the European leaders is to hold off the people. The people are going to look and they're going to say, well, it's starting to appear as though our industry is being stolen, our culture is being taken, our economy is being wiped out. And they look at their leaders and say, what are you going to do? And the leader's job is to lie to them, to go back to their bosses in Washington and say, we're going to hold them off as long as we can. And then once they riot on us, we're gonna get the hell out of here. So you better have a villa somewhere south of Miami for us to get into, because they'll kill us if you don't. So their job is to wipe out Europe, to sacrifice Europe. That is going. They're maintaining course and speed as far as their jobs. Puppets for the U.S. empire, pacify the people, keep their mouths shut while the U.S. sacrifices everything that they've worked for the last 5 centuries. Gone. Okay. Russia understands that as well as I do and you do. All right, continue. So now that Russia understands what they're up against the U.S. empire that is willing to sacrifice everything around to destroy them. The Russians realize something. There is no diplomacy going on here with the U.S. empire or the EU. No, forget talking to the EU, they don't exist. Forget talking to the U.S. empire, because the neocons are pure ideologues and they can't be reasoned with. And if they didn't already know, no, Petro Poroshenko, who was the former U.S. puppet leader of Ukraine, came out and said, when we made a peace deal in 2014, when the U.S. overthrew the government of Ukraine, and I'm adding some of that, but what he actually said was this: when we made this peace deal, it was called the Minsk Accords with the Russians. We only did it so we could hold the Russians off long enough to get ready for war with them. So the Russians realized, okay, so we were saying all along, we have a peace deal. Let's effect this peace deal. Let's make it happen and get peace. And it was all a fraud. It was all hold off, hold off, hold off. It was just a tool used by the U.S. empire to hold us off until they could strengthen the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian military enough that they could, in their eyes, defeat or at minimum weaken the Russians. What's interesting about that is, what the U.S. empire didn't realize at that point, it was very counterproductive, because, and I don't know that they had another option considering what their nefarious and evil plans were, but what's interesting about that is, at the same time, the U.S. was holding off the Russians with the Minsk Accords, right, with this fake peace agreement, so that they could build up the military, the military, and dig in all of these entrenchments and prepare for war with Russia. Russia was kind of doing the same thing. Russia knew at that point that maybe conflict was in the future. They knew that they had some adversaries that were getting closer and closer and closer to their border. So Russia was building up their military technology, working hard to increase their military technology. Thus, we've got all of these new missiles and all of these electronic warfare, drones, all kinds of stuff. So they're building that up. They're building up their military. So at the same time that the U.S. was prepping, what's interesting is the U.S. was prepping Ukraine to go to war with Russia. Russia was building up their military and their economy. Russia was also, over the last several years, because the U.S. put massive sanctions against Russia after 2014. Russia started building up internally. They became an autarky, as they say. In other words, they were becoming an autarky. They were becoming a country that's sufficient. We build our own stuff. We make our own stuff. We can handle it. And of course, Russia has the things that you need to survive long term. They have energy. They have food. They grow their own food. And they have a strong military to protect their borders. A country needs those three things to really survive through hard times, or whatever the case may be. You need a strong military so others can't evade you. You need to grow your own food so you don't starve. They're the #1 producer of wheat, all kinds of food. And now that they've taken a huge part of Ukraine, this really fertile part of Ukraine, they're going to be able to grow even more food, right? They have industry they can make. So Russia's building up for a two-front war. They've been building for the economic war, in that they've been increasing their output of commodities. They've been increasing their ability to mine, to dig for more oil and gas wells, all the things they need to do internally. They've been increasing that, saving up their money, on and on and on, building up their military technology. So they've been protecting. I mean, they've been preparing to protect themselves. So now we get here. The Russians come out initially with a plan to, let's get this over kind of quick. Let's get back to business. Let's do diplomacy. They go in there. That doesn't work at all. The U.S. empire is like, yes, now we got an opportunity to do a couple of things, right? Number one, as Lloyd Austin said, we want to weaken Russia. That was the plan all along. But how did they do that? Well, the U.S. has an Achilles heel, and it's called neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is, first and foremost, the corporations got to eat. So no matter what the Russians' the Americans' foreign policy is, the Achilles heel in that foreign policy is you've got a military-industrial complex that thinks of first and foremost making a profit. So the U.S. gets this war started, okay? This is going on, and the military-industrial complex is rubbing their hands together. The military-industrial, you think Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics care about winning or losing a war? No, they always win. They view this the same way as they do. There was a while back, I covered this, and it was the CEO of Boeing when Trump was running against Biden, and he said, "Look, I don't care who wins, brother." And I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, I don't care who wins. Either way, we're going to eat. We're Boeing. Doesn't matter. We always win, right? And I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said it doesn't matter who wins. We feel that we'll be in good economic shape, that we're going to get contracts, blah, blah, blah. He knew he's military-industrial complex. He's got Congress on his side. Doesn't matter who tries to stop him. They're going to have overwhelming votes in Congress every time. That's the one thing that Congress can agree on. So the war starts, and the neocons are like, okay, number one, we got to go after Russia with everything we got. This is our chance to weaken Russia so we can take Russia out. The military-industrial complex is like, oh, man, we're going to eat now. And the think tanks and all of the associated infrastructure for the neocons. They got lots of think tanks. They got all of these cyber crap that they can say we're being cyber attacked, all the ways that they funnel money out of the national treasury into their pockets are all rare, man. They're just roaring and burning red hot with this war. So the Center for Strategic Mayhem, or whatever the hell, that Victoria Nuland's people, all of these think tanks, man, they're getting paid big time. Media, there's a war going on. They know they're going to eat. Military-industrial complex, send it, brother. Just keep sending notes, sending that loot. The problem they had was, it was an actual war, and there is actually people on the other side, and the people on the other side, namely the Russians, see this as an existential threat. They're backed into a corner. And if you know anything about combat or conflict, right? Two things. The first rule of conflict, again, from self-defense training, the first rule of conflict is what? Never underestimate your adversary. The first rule of conflict is you always believe my adversary is bigger than I am. He's stronger than I am. He's faster than I am. He's more well-trained than I am. If you do that, you will avoid conflict, because you will always assume that if we have a conflict, I'm going to have the fight of my life, right? That's what causes you to avoid conflict. The assumption that your enemy is stronger. And if your enemy is stronger, you're prepared for it. And your main goal is to get the hell out of the conflict. If your enemy is not stronger, you've made the assumption that you can overcome your enemy and win the conflict, right? The U.S. went in with all of these stupid assumptions, neocon ideologue assumptions. The Russians are weak. The Russians are stupid. The Russians have nothing, blah, 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 blah. They made a critical error. And the other thing they didn't take into account, and you have to take this into account, right? Think about a dog. There's like a little teeny mutt, and he's running down the street, and somebody kicks at that little mutt, and the mutt, and off he runs, right? And he chased that mutt, and that mutt runs, and he screams and he yells and he runs home, and the mutt goes to the front door and he can't get in, and the person corners that mutt. You got a problem. You got a problem now. He ain't got nowhere to run. He's going back up. Now, you know what that mutt that was running and screaming and had his tail between his legs is going to do? He's going to bare his fangs. You may defeat that mutt, but he's going to bite the hell out of you. You don't want that fight. Right? That's a fight you don't want. You've backed that mutt into a corner. He has no way. He sees the potential for death. He doesn't even think about, actually, that dog doesn't think about those things. He doesn't reason it out. He doesn't have a concept of dying. Now, the natural instincts kick in. And now you got problems. He's stronger, he's faster, he's meaner, and he doesn't feel pain, right? People feel like that. They don't even feel pain. So now I'm not talking about drugs. I'm talking about natural hormones that your body releases, right? That's what you got to take into account. If you're in conflict with someone and you corner that person, you don't want to fight. I don't care if they're not trained. You don't want to corner people because they're now you got to fight to the death. They will, a person who is cornered will bite you and bite your throat out and spit it out, blood everywhere. They don't care. They're not grossed out by anything. They're not scared. They have now the natural instincts to survive have kicked in, right? The U.S. went to Russia's border. Russia's been attacked by, Hitler, Napoleon. Come on and on and on. The Crimean War, on and on and on, right? The Russians understand what it's like to have an existential threat on your border and lose 30 million people. That ain't gonna happen if they can help it. So now they're on their border. They're backed into a corner. They'll fight forever. They'll never stop because what they see is if we lose, we all die. That ain't happening. We're going to fight until we can't fight no more, and then we'll nuke you. That's the rush. That's what a human being would do. That's what that little dog would do. If he had a nuke and you back that dog in his porch, he had nowhere else to run. He pushed the button. Well, okay, you're going to die. He ain't stop to think about it. So the bottom line is, at that point, that's where the Russians are. Not that they're backed into a corner in that they're going to lose, but they're backed into a corner in that the reality is, when it comes to Ukraine, the Russians have such superior firepower because they've done two things. Understand this. People are looking at Ukraine as though that's the battle that the Russians are fighting. It ain't. It ain't. The Russians are looking at this saying, this is a fight. This is a skirmish that we got to win this skirmish, but it's a skirmish. But what the Russians are thinking is, if they saw this Poland stuff, they're all ready for it, and they're thinking to themselves, look, if the U.S. and their allies somehow come up with some kind of a false flag and trigger an Article 5, and they decide all of NATO wants to attack Russia, we got to be prepared for it. That's why they only sent 150,000 people out of a 1 million-man army. Right? They held the major part of their forces back. The Russians have held the major. People are like, they're running out of missiles. You ain't seen Russian missiles. I will guarantee you this because I know how the Russian culture works. I will guarantee you this. They're holding back 90% of their missiles, 90% of their firepower, 90% of everything. They're holding it all back because what they see is this. We can fight the Ukrainians for a long time. We can send the people up. That's all good and fine. But if the U.S. and NATO attack us with everything they got, that's a real war. And we want everything we got to fight that. I guarantee you that. It's only logical. Anybody that looks at this has to figure out what would you do if you were Russia? You would say, we got Ukraine here. That's an expeditionary war. That's a skirmish. We got to win that, and we will. But if we get attacked by NATO, and they can clearly see with Poland and some of these countries, they're chopping at the bit. Like a friggin' Ukrainian missile flew into Poland and hit a potato farm, and they're like, yes, we got them now. World War III, let's go. If you're the Russians, you look at that and you're like, we were right. Make sure everything we got, everything is ready. Because if we get attacked by NATO, we got to hit them so hard on the first day and it's like a self-defense, right? I don't want any trouble. I'm going to back up. But if it gets to the point where I got to fight, I'm going to try in self-defense. You want to hurt your opponent. You want to give your opponent so much pain so quickly that it changes their mindset, that they say to themselves, oh, I've made a mistake. I don't want to fight here. Even if they're bigger and stronger, even if they could potentially win the fight, you want to hurt them so bad, so quickly. You want to strike quickly and with overwhelming force to the point where their mindset changes and they're like, maybe I don't want this fight. Where they see the fangs of that little dog come out and they're like, I might win this, but I'm going to get bit really, really bad. You want to bite them and bite them hard. You want them to see blood, right? And a lot of it. Their eyes are hurting. Their throats are hanging. They've been kneading the groin. They've been elbowed, struck in the solar plexus, and you're still going whack, 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 whack. You're kicking. You're doing everything you can. You're not going to throw a punch and walk away. These punches keep coming until they're backing off on a flurry. Oh my God, my finger got grabbed and snapped in this direction. Poked in the eyes, clapped on the ear, everything you could think. You're throwing everything you can at them because you're trying to survive. This person wants to kill you. They might have a knife or a gun or two other people that are all waiting to jump on you. You got to get on top of this situation, Your life's in danger. Hit it with everything you got and get the hell out. Flee. Your plan is they backed you into a corner. You want to strike with everything you got and get the hell out of there. Well, if you're home, you can't get out of there. You got to protect your home, right? So the Russians are looking at it saying, if in fact NATO does something and triggers articles 4s, 5s, or whatever, they got a hit coming that they ain't going to be prepared for. They ain't going to be ready for this one. Don't want to do it. We're going to warn them, please back up. But if that happens, they're not going to be prepared for the kind of strike that they're going to get. Meanwhile, you're starting to see that Europe, it's clear. NATO is not prepared for a war with Russia. They didn't prepare for that. That's not what they did. That's not what the military industrial complex does. It doesn't prepare for a war with Russia. It makes profit as much as it can. And a lot of the weapons that were created were prepared for what they were doing, which is going after a bunch of guys in Toyota trucks in the desert. I think that doesn't work against the peer power. And the other part of it is this: the U.S. empire did not actually prepare for the diplomatic war that Russia would be executing. And yes, the US is executing a diplomatic war also, but they do it differently. And that is, they're heavy-handed. They use the iron fist. They go around and say, you better support us, you better support us, you better support us, or else, you better support us, or else. Russia goes around, they shake hands, they say, we'd like to do business with you. Oh, what the heck, you need some grain, here you go. You need some discount price on oil, gas, energy, whatever. Not a problem, we'll give it to you for 30% off, right? Hey, can we do business? Can you help us out and support us? And the other countries are like, hey, everybody in the world listens to the same radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? So Russia goes to India and they're like, hey, you remember the UK? Remember those bastards that starved 8 to 12 million of your people? And for a century, they ruled you guys with an iron hand and slaughtered, murdered, and did every horrible thing in the world to you. Yeah, well, they're back. But how about we give you a deal on oil? And the Indians are like, A, we don't like the Brits. B, yeah, we got a lot of poor people here. And there's a lot of issues going on, inflation, things of that nature. Thanks a lot. We'll take it. Now, guess who's on whose side? So there's a diplomatic war, and Russia is executing a diplomatic war in a much different way than the U.S. They're not doing it in a heavy. It's the iron fist versus the velvet glove. That's the diplomacy. The U.S. uses the iron fist. The Russia's using the velvet glove. So that's because, see, people think about the kinetic conflict, the bombs falling. There's an economic war. And what the Russians doing with the economic war? They settled in for the long run, and they realized in the long run, we need allies. So we got lots of commodities that everybody needs. We'll give them a deal on it. We'll give people a deal. And some of the poor countries in Africa and South America, they gave Cuba 19 million tons or something like that free of grain. Lebanon, here, some free grain. Africa, they've got all this grain and stuff in all of these ports all over Europe. And they're like said to Africa, hey guys, times are kind of hard. Yeah, we'll release all that grain. You can have it free. They're doing diplomacy. And let's face it, the right thing. If somebody's poorer than you and you got something, I got a biscuit, you got none, here, you can have half of my biscuit. That's what Russia's doing to Africa and South America. Now, so these countries who've been stomped on and beat on by the US and the colonial empires for years are like, thanks. So Russia's doing this economic and diplomatic part of the war, which is a long term. We're building alliances, building coalitions, right? One of the things I was trained in was, interestingly enough, how to be an executive director for a nonprofit. And in that, what do they teach you? Number one, first and foremost, build coalitions. You're stronger if you build a coalition with other nonprofits and you all can work together for whatever the ultimate end is. Well, you're working for the environment. I'm working for, I don't know, the homeless. Why don't we work together? And when you have something that you're working on the environment, I'll come there. When I have something that I'll support that. When I have something I'm working for homeless people or whatever, you'll come support mine. We are both stronger, right? So Russia's out building coalitions. They're doing coalition building diplomatically. And now they got India. They got all of Africa. The other day, the U.S. was mad, and some of the U.S. Westerners were mad at this Cameroon soccer player, right? Cameroon, Black Africans, right? You know why? Because he had Russian flags on his cleats. And why? He had dual citizenship. He's got citizenship in Russia. He went to school in Russia and Canberra. See what I mean? So Russia, the Soviet Union historically had built a strong relationship with African countries, and the today's Russia is taking advantage of that diplomatically. Nothing wrong with that. You got diplomatically strength, use them, using those to expand their coalition. So the US's plan was to isolate Russia in exposing the centuries long neo-colonial and colonial oppression of so many countries worldwide, and exposing that to attack. They've given Russia an angle to say, look, these bastards been doing you dirty for 5 centuries. Come on, they've invaded your countries, they made you colonial vassals, and then they genocided and all kinds of crap. How's that worked out for you? In like Africa and South America and Asian countries are like, yeah, we kind of got screwed. Russia's like, hey, let's be friends. And their countries are like, sounds good to me. Okay, so that's a long-term thing. As the Russians fought short term, right? My mom used to have a saying, live as though you're going to live 1,000 years, and at the same time, live as though you're going to die tomorrow. So they're fighting on the battlefield at the same time, diplomatic, economic coalition building around the world. That those are long-term goals. And it appears that what Russia realized at some point, I don't know how early in the conflict they realized this, this is going to be this could be a long-term thing. And if it isn't, we need to prepare as though it is, because I think Russia looked at it and realized if it's going to be a long term, we don't know, it may not be, but if it is, we can't be caught by surprise. So what Russia has done is they've geared up their military industrial complex, which was strong already. They were the industrial power, commodity power, right? But they've built that up. So now they're cranking out all the military stuff. They're preparing. Russia's at the time they're trying to end this thing, they're also preparing as though it's World War III, as though it's a ground war. They're preparing everything they need for World War III ground war, at the same time doing everything they can to avoid World War III ground war, right? That's the, again, Putin's a black belt. What do you want to do? You want to, when you prepare for self-defense and when you train, you want to do everything you can to learn how to avoid it. You want to learn how your self-awareness, your situational awareness that in conflict, right? When you walk to your car, you're looking around. Or if you see somebody that looks suspicious, do you look them in their eyes? Do you walk with confidence? All the things that you do to lower the probability that someone will attack you, right? Putin's a black belt. He knows that. But at the same time, you prepare your skills and you prepare your strength. You do your push-ups and your sit-ups and your core work and all these things you do to prepare. So you're like, I am prepared. If there's a conflict, you're in a bar and people start arguing, you get the hell out of there. Somebody bumps into you, what's your problem? You leave. Some person staring at you, why are you looking at my girl? You don't even know what he's talking about, but he's drunk. You get the hell out of there. Right? You have learned situational awareness to avoid conflict, but you've also prepared. So if somebody just runs up behind you and grabs you, when you have your book bag, let's say you carry a backpack, you don't carry it with both straps. You carry it with one strap. Why is that? If you got it both straps, somebody can grab you and pull you straight backwards. If you've got one strap and it's hanging off, if they grab your backpack and pull, you turn sideways, it slips off, pow, you strike them with an elbow. Boom, you hit them with a chop. You turn around, you give them a kick, or at minimum, you spin around, you're prepped, and you survey the situation. Somebody grabs your backpack and it's on one shoulder. You turn, it slips off. Situational awareness. What is it? Is it a friend? Is it somebody playing? Is it an attack? Can I flee? Do they have a weapon? You can turn around and you can be aware of the situation. You can be totally prepared for whatever you need to do. Well, these are all these things that are preparing for conflict, but first and foremost, you want to avoid it. Putin studies this. He's a martial artist. He knows these things. This is going to affect the way he prepares for conflict. The self-defense is nothing but conflict preparation. How do I avoid conflict? If it's forced upon me, how do I defend myself? And if I see there's no way to avoid a conflict, I want the some guys, you see that look in somebody's face. Their teeth, their fists are clenched, and they're not talking. You're like, hey, I don't want any trouble, and right? You now know there's no avoidance of conflict. Then you better strike first. You better strike this guy first. He's angry, he's crazy, he's whatever, right? So all of these things are in the mind of a person who understands self-defense. So they're acting long-term, diplomatically, economically, etc. They're surveying the situation. The U.S. is in total completely in charge of this conflict. This conflict is being fought in the information zone. It's being fought in the military zone. It's being fought diplomatically, and it's being fought economically. Make sure that I'm working with all of those. And let me add this: economically, it's the U.S. versus Russia, and Europe is a patsy. Europe is fuel. I'll put it like this: if this is a conflict, Europe is effectively fuel. The U.S. in stealing their money, in selling them, cutting them off from Russian energy and selling them U.S. LNG at an inflated price. They're able to take money to steal the resources to prey on Europe as these idiots. I hate to use this word, just buy into it and happily throw themselves into the U.S. economic wood chipper. They're able to prey on Europe, use Europe as a tool that they can fight Russia with. The Russians see all of this, and they're like, okay, we see what we're up against. Forget Europe. They ain't part of it. They're fuel being burned. They're a tool. They're a weapon being wielded. Economically, boom, big brother China. China's the big economy. Russia says, hey, can you help us out? They don't even have to say that. China says, look, I'll buy everything you got. Don't worry about your economy. I'll prop it up. So Russia's doing well, because they have an autarchical economy to some perspective, to some extent, wherein they make their own stuff. You can cut them off. There was, I hate to use this, but I'll use this joke. There was an old a radio talk show host that would always do, the edgy stuff, right? And one day he says his girlfriend said, I'm going to cut you off, and he said, you can't cut me off because you don't know where I'm getting it, right? A crude joke, forgive me, but it applies here, in that the U.S. is like, okay, we're going to cut you off economically, and China's like, oh no, you're not. What are you selling Russia? We're buying it all. And we need things. You got things. We're just, forget everybody else. We're buying everything we need. We're going to make sure that you have enough money. One thing China's got lots of: money. And they need the things that Russia sells, so they can buy the stuff from Russia first and foremost. They can help to prop up their ally. So in the economic sphere, Russia now, it's the U.S. economically, the U.S. versus Russia and China, right? And there's no proxy going on there. And diplomatically, China is working hand in hand with Russia to build BRICS, to build the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So economically, diplomatically, it's Russia and China versus the U.S. Militarily, it's Russia in a proxy war versus the U.S. and its empires and its vassals, its sad and pathetic colonies in Europe. So what's going on now, as I see it, is Russia has just made the move now. They said, we're settling down. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get lots and lots of troops. The numbers I'm hearing are between 3 and 4, maybe a little over 400,000. So if they had, let's say they had 150,000 troops in altogether, they're bringing in another 400,000. This is going to be a massive army. So now what the Russians are able to do is they're able to fight on the front lines. And this is something to think of, and it's very important. The Russians are able to, A, fight on the front lines, right? But B, they're able to keep their troops fresh. Their troops fight, you bring them back, you let them fight a day, a week, however long it is, and you keep rotating troops. So they're in there, they're shooting, they're fighting, they're firing, they're doing the things they do. You move these back, you put in fresh troops. They fight for a while, they move them back, get some R&R, put them in the back, they work and do other things, and you keep changing until such time as getting a little call here. Let me stop that for now. Until such time. So as these troops get tired and you keep your troops fresh, that allows for a long war. Meanwhile, what does Ukraine have? They're grabbing every poor schmuck they got off the street, no matter, up to like 55 or 60 years old, like people who make me look like, I'm 20 years old. Yeah. Have you seen some of these poor people? Their hair is white as snow. They're stumbling around on the, old. They got bad backs. They got rheumatoid arthritis. For God's sake, they're taking these poor old bastards and throwing them out to fight the Russians, right? And it's cold, it's wintertime, and you're in a trench. Trust me, Ukrainian troops ain't happy. I'm not saying they're not fighting. I'm not saying they're not tough. I'm just saying the military training, knowledge, and ability is dramatically decreasing as this war goes on, as the attrition goes on, as they lose their frontline troops, as they replace them with what's called the territorial defense forces, what we would call the National Guard, and they're really getting they're getting thin in what they're able to use. And the Russians now going to soon have a 500,000 man army, and they're going to be putting in fresh troops, fresh war material that's theirs. That is theirs, that's integrated into their, let's call it, war machine, right? Their military machine. So it's going to be more people. They're going to be consistently better trained, and they're going to be very well equipped with things that they're well trained on. Meanwhile, the U.S. is just throwing if they got an old Volkswagen, what do you got there, Joe? Yeah, we got an old Volkswagen Beetle from 1961. Looks like we can get it running. Send it to Ukraine. That's kind of where they are now. You got any old guns laying around? Nah, we got we got some steak knives. We can sharpen them up and tape them on the end of a on the end of the barrel with use it as a bayonet. Good enough. Send it on out to Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians are just cannon fodder anyway. Let's face it. What does the U.S. empire care? As long as they got more Ukrainians to die, they're happy. They're like, hey, we're losing. Are there any more Ukrainians? Yeah, we got another couple 100,000. Okay, throw them out there until they'll die and try to find me some more. Zelensky, we need more Ukrainians. The ones we're running out. Poles, apparently now it's come out that there's a bunch of Poles. And they're like, hey, which is interesting because the Ukrainian fascists were never real thrilled with the Poles. And now, I mean, how do you get that? The U.S. empire's like said to the Poles, here's what we want to do. You hate the Russians. Yeah, well, the Ukrainian fascists hate you. But do you hate the Russians worse than you hate the Ukrainian fascists who literally genocided your people? And the Poles are like, yeah, sure, whatever. If you tell us to do it, we'll sacrifice our people like dogs. And so now there's these cemeteries popping up, apparently, with a bunch of Polish mercenaries, whatever the case. Apparently the Poles are throwing their cannon fodder over there. So the U.S., as they're running out of Ukrainian bodies to be torn to shreds with shrapnel, apparently the Poles are stupid enough to follow them into the the abyss, and boom, down they go. And meanwhile, I add this, there's an added benefit for the Russians, and that is in the event that they don't want to, obviously, clearly nobody wants World War III because we know how that ends. But in the event that they would have to go to kinetic conflict with NATO, why not have NATO send you all of their shit first so you can blow it up? So they got the added benefit that, in the long term, NATO's throwing tanks, airplanes, whatever, and they're like, "Whoa, hold on, we're busy blowing these up." That's the Russians are sitting there like saying to NATO, "Can you take a break for about a week? We got to finish blowing up the stuff you have." NATO sends in another, gaggle of God only knows what. The Russians blow it to hell. All right, we got it all, got the battlefield clear. We've blown everything up that NATO sent. Yeah, next round. I mean, it's almost like you're in a restaurant. They should give them an order sheet. Yes, can you give us 10 tanks? 11 air defense systems, and 3 more HIMARS. Boom, in they go. Boom, they blow them up. All right, time for more. So the Russians have the added effect of this battle of demilitarizing Europe, and Europe didn't have a lot of stuff in the first place, and now Europe's screaming, oh my God, we're broke, we're cold, our industry's going to the US, and we got like a day's worth of military stuff if we should get in a fight. Again, the EU is a sacrificial lamb, so they need to just shut up. They just shut up, EU. Don't even complain anymore. You're doing your job well. Your job is to be sacrificed, just like the Ukrainians, and you're doing it well. just keep shivering, just keep paying 5 times what you should for U.S. LNG that's being shipped in there. You have decided that you want everything to be blue and yellow on your continent, and you want nothing to be green because you're going to be broke, and that's what you're going to get. Deal with it. In this movie, the EU has chosen their role. Their role is, if it's like, I don't know, you ever see one of these movies where there's a werewolf? Yeah, those of you who haven't watched, everybody knows this in the US. For those of you who haven't watched US movies, let me tell you. I got to tell you this, people know it. Everybody knows this. Not everybody says it, but everybody knows this. If you see a movie and there's like some guys camping in the wilderness and there's like a werewolf that are at them, and somewhere there's like Billy, Joey, Bobby, and Tyrone. And don't pretend if you're an American you don't know this. And they're all camping in the wilderness and out in the wilderness, way out, and you hear something go, oh, and they're like, that sounds like a werewolf. I think we're in trouble. Everybody knows the black guys get mangled first. You watched 100 movies, Tyrone's going to get it. They're all going to be, there's a noise. There's some rustling in the bushes. They're going to look over in the bushes. Hey, somebody take a look. It's going to be Tyrone. He's going to be like, okay, guys. And they're going to give him like a club or like a piece of firewood. And he's like, I'll go check it out. The werewolf comes out, it's going to mangle him, yank his throat out. They're all going to run for their lives. But poor old Tyrone, if you watch American movies, he's getting it. When I watched, what was that movie? Independence Day. I knew, when I knew the aliens were bad? Okay, there's these alien ships, right? And they're like, let's send a couple helicopters up to try to communicate with them, right? And I saw the helicopters take off and they show the pilot and he's a black guy. And I'm like, yep, it's safe to say the aliens ain't friendly, because when they send the black guy out early in the movies in Hollywood, he's a goner. So, the helicopters get closer, whatever they are, they get closer and closer, and they're flashing some lights and signals to the aliens, and everybody's like, what's going to happen? And like all the black people like, we already know what's going to happen. This bastard's done. Within seconds, the aliens shoot a beam out, blow everything to smithereens. The poor old black guy in the helicopter gets what every black guy in the beginning of an action movie gets. He gets taken out. When we go with the movie, hey, you can like it, you can hate it, whatever the case may be. That's the way Hollywood has chosen to do things, and we recognize it, right? Europe, you're the black guy at the beginning of the horror movie, right? You are Tyrone Jefferson at the beginning of a 1980s Hollywood movie, a movie called Howling at the Moon. That's the name of this werewolf movie. EU, you're Tyrone Jefferson. Your job is to take a piece of firewood and to walk over and check the rustling in the bushes and the howling. That's your job, and you're going to get mangled. Go do it. When Tyrone, whoever the guy was, when you see the credits at the end and it was whoever, right? Hey, who was that? That was Will Smith. Hey, Will Smith, when he took that job, he knew, hey, what am I going to be? Well, Will, we got an opening for a werewolf movie. Yeah, really? Black guy in a werewolf movie. Am I going to be the werewolf? Not exactly. Not directly, indirectly, in that if the werewolf consumes you, at some point you become part of the werewolf. But we're just saying, if you want the job, we think you know how the direction that it goes. And, Will Smith's like, hey, maybe he just started his career. It's the 1980s. He's ready to get paid. All right, I'll be the black guy in a werewolf movie. He signs up. He knows what's going to happen. He knows that they got fake blood. They're going to squirt all over. He knows he's a goner. He does it, but the brother's got to eat. He's got to eat. He takes the job. I take it. I take the job. But they're like, hey, Garland, you want a job in a werewolf movie? As soon as I heard it, it'd be one of two things. Am I going to be the werewolf? Nope. Well, then I know I'm going to be the first victim of the werewolf. Yeah, that's your job. All right, I'll take it. Hey, brother's got to eat. Don't hate, right? Bottom line is, Europe, you are Tyrone Jefferson in our 1980s werewolf movie, Howling at the Moon. 10 minutes in, when we try to figure out what the rustling in the bushes and the howling off into the distance is, you're going to be the person who demonstrates that it is a werewolf and he ain't in a good mood. You're getting it. And you've accepted that role. Do what you got to do. Europe, you've accepted the role of getting mangled. Get mangled. Do that. Don't get angry. Don't get upset. You took the job. You knew what it was. Hey, you signed off on the paper. Economically, everything, you're getting mangled. We all know that. The Russians know it. The Americans know it. The European leaders know it. The only people that don't really know it are the idiots that are running around with blue and yellow flags, painting their fences blue and yellow. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't understand the werewolf is getting ready to mangle them, and they don't understand it's their job. Doesn't matter. They're going to get mangled anyway. Werewolves aren't like, hey, are you down with this mangling thing? You don't like walk over to the bushes and the werewolf is like, hey, man, I'm going to mangle you. But first, I want to make sure you're okay with it because, we wouldn't want to do something that upsets you, really. I mean, hey, no, that's not the way werewolves work. You're there in front of them, they mangle you. It's, hey, don't hate. It's their jobs. They got to eat too. And I mean that both literally and figuratively, right? Europe, your werewolf food. And Russia has taken that into account. The U.S. has taken that into account. So they all can move forward for the long term based on that foundational belief that it's the U.S. versus Russia. But the U.S. made a dramatic error in their, what's the word? In their arrogance. They thought that China would be afraid of them and China would go along with them and China would see Russia as an enemy too. And that China would help them take out Russia so they could then take out China. How do you figure that? Because you're an ideologue neocon and you don't have a freaking brain cell in your head. And all these countries that they'd oppressed for the last 100 years and overthrown repeatedly, for some reason they thought they'd be on their side too. Didn't work. So now the US empire is in a situation where I think there are those in Europe who are waking up saying, hey, this mangling stuff, it don't feel so good. Perhaps we should go in another direction. So some people in Europe are wise enough to start asking a question or two of why they're werewolf food. And what Russia realized is that every day that goes by, another European throws his blue and yellow flag out the window and says, I'm cold, I don't like this, and I'm hungry. Every day that goes by, some more Europeans look around and say, hey, what the hell's going on here? And bit by bit, they've turned off the lights in Ukraine. They've done long-term things in that battle. They've settled in. People are expecting a big offensive. Yes and no. I think it'll be a rolling offensive where it gives you time rather than just wham. Then there's one or two ways they could do it. I may be wrong. Let me give you the two options for the Russians. Option one is sledgehammer. Let's knock this thing out before the end of the year. And in a way, that would save Europe. It could save Europe because the sooner this thing is over, if it's obviously over, then Europe can say, well, it's over. Can we have our energy back, please? Right? They can be like, hey, darn it, these things are over. The stinking evil Russians have won this thing. And oh man, but since it's over, perhaps we could start negotiating to get our energy back. So it could save Europe to some extent before they're completely deindustrialized if they do a big hammer. The other possibility, though, if they do a big hammer, is the reaction of the neocons. They could say, well, we got to fight. I don't think that's an option for the neocons for two reasons. The Washington neocons, A, they don't have the military resources to really confront Russia right now in Europe. And B, the neocons don't want to die, and they know that if they go to war with Russia, there's a good likelihood it ends in nuclear annihilation of everybody, and they ain't the fighting, nuclear annihilating kind of types. They like they're soft as friggin' kittens' feet, and so they just want to lay around and make lots of money. They don't really want to fight. They don't really want to die. They don't want to fireball over their house, so they're kind of reticent to go in that direction. They want to win, trying to be slick, trying to outsmart their opponents, and they're really stupid, so that really doesn't work well. At any rate, so as Russia settles in, they can slam hard and end this thing kind of quick. But in doing that, rather than see, I put it to you like this. I put it like this. What the Russians want is collapse in Ukraine. They want Ukraine to militarily, economically, and in every way infrastructure, everything to collapse. See, if there's still a military to fight, then the U.S. can argue we got to go in and booster the military, boost the military we have, and support the military and support the infrastructure and support the political infrastructure in Ukraine. If it all collapses, there's nothing to clean up. What are you going to do? Hey, what's happened? The Russian military has overrun the positions of the Ukrainians. They're all they can do is run right now. You know, it's like they're in full retreat. How are you going to back people that are running? How you? Hey, I'm going to support you. Yeah, great, but right now I got to run because there's a guy behind me with a tank. So if you create total collapse in Ukraine, there's nothing for the U.S. empire to prop up. There's nothing for the U.S. empire to defend. There's nothing. Correct, collapse. So they could hit it with a big punch, or they could do more of a slow and rolling offensive. Just as dominant. It's like in Zen or martial arts, whatever. You talk about the difference between fire and water. Fire is powerful that just burns everything up around it, right? And it's powerful. But water is extremely powerful. It's more subtle. It envelops everything around it slowly. But you ever seen what a tidal wave will do? So you got a forest fire that burns everything up in a fury. You got a tidal wave that envelops everything and just wipes out everything and overpowers everything in its path. Philosophically, from a Zen perspective, you could make that kind of argument, right? So if the Russians do a fire offensive, wham, they slam into everything, they force a sudden collapse. There are certain risk with that. Does that shock the neocons to the point where we've got to fight? Or do they do the water offensive, a rolling, powerful offensive that gives your enemy a chance to back up, a chance to run, a chance to think, a chance to consider that maybe I should try, I got enough time to talk. I got enough time. So you can do that. I see this wave coming and it's powerful and it's moving in my direction. I got time to run. I got time to think about it. See what I mean? So there's two ways the Russians can go. I'm not saying one way is right or the other way is right. Either one of them could happen. I think if I was the Russians, I may go for the latter. I may go for the more slow offensive, but either one, I can make an argument for either one. I can make an argument for the hammer, punch, get it done quick, get out of it, get it cleaned up, and give Europe. If I'm Europe, I'm rooting for a big punch, knock it over. Now I can say to the U.S., look, man, we got to negotiate. We got to survive. This thing's over. There's nothing left to save. Slow, if it's happening slowly. The other thing, though, is if it's happening slowly, it gives Europe more of a chance to kind of wake up, to see what's obvious and say, you see what's coming, you see what's happening. We got a week or two. We got a couple weeks max. This thing's falling apart. We gotta get this thing together, and we got to talk to the Russians, and we got to make a deal here, right? Either way, one of those two things I think is coming within weeks. Within the ground being good and frozen. They may wait 3 weeks. They may wait till late December, mid to late December, when the ground's good and frozen and it's easy for them to advance. But at any rate, meanwhile, as I said at the beginning, they're settled in for a long war, because there is option 3. Option 3 is you don't do a major offensive, that you dig in and you let the lack of infrastructure, and you let the darkness and the cold do its dirt on both the EU. You let the EU suffer and see what a nasty winter feels like. You let the Ukrainians suffer and see what a nasty winter feels like, and get the hell out of there and start flooding the EU. Now you got 10, 15, 20 million, 15 million Ukrainians going into the EU in the wintertime, when the EU can't even afford to heat and feed itself. And now it's got Ukrainians all over the border by the millions. You allow that dynamic. You sit there and you allow them to leave. Here's the other part of it. Let's just say you evacuate Kiev, whatever the hell it's called. I don't know. Let's just say you evacuate that, right? You allow them them to evacuate it. Well, guess what you got now? Kiev's evacuated, right? Ain't nothing there but military. You come in there and pound the living hell out of it, and you take Kiev. Now, you put 150, 200,000 men on Kiev, and you take the capital city. So if the West looks at Kiev and says, but they got no water, how can they go through the winter? with all these high-rise buildings, with no water, with no heat, with nothing but food. How are you going to move food around? How are you going to feed 1 million people, or however many people's in Kyiv with no food? So you wait, and now they have to leave, and the only thing left is the military protecting it. Well, that's an easy one now, isn't it? You come in and you flatten everything. You move. You move. I'm off the. You bring your people forward. You flatten everything in front of them. You move them forward. You flatten everything in front of them. You move them forward. You do old school military. Now you are put artillery and everything. You cut Kyiv off. You can bomb the bridges that from the west that come into Kyiv. Destroy Kyiv. Those bridges that come into Kyiv. So now it can't be resupplied. You bring up 150,000, 200,000 men on it, 150,000, and you let them have it. And now the capital city falls. See what I mean? There's so many options the Russians have now. And I think either a major punch of an offensive, a slow rolling offensive, or as I said, maintain course and speed. Sit there, let General Winter do his dirt, and you punch some, like you got some areas you want to take back. You want to take this city, you want to take that city, you want to take some areas, Bakhmut, blah, blah, blah. You go out there, you hit them hard, you keep them, letting them know I can take what I want. You take this, you take that, you take this, you take that, you keep them on the move, and it's going to be difficult. So at any rate, the bottom line is they're set up for the long term. If the Russians have to be in Ukraine for the next 20 years, I think that's what they're preparing for. And I think the Chinese are prepping for it too. Interesting what happened with Taiwan. Now also the Taiwanese elections, the ruling party, who was U.S. puppets, got thrashed, got crushed. So the U.S.'s plans in Ukraine ain't working so well. Their plans in Taiwan just got dashed by the fact that the ruling party and their puppets got the crap beat out of them. So things ain't looking good for the neocons. The Russians are dug in for the long term, and we shall see. Thanks a lot, everybody. I got to get ready to run, so I can't do super chats right now. I appreciate. Well, I'll try to do a couple. Let's go. Let's do what I can. Brighton Thought says, "Hey Garland, I'm a left-leaning YouTuber with 24,000 subs. Would have you on my show one day. Can we make this happen?" Hey man, just email me like everybody else. No problem. garlandin@gmail.com. garlandin@gmail.com. All right, so give me a yell. How about this? Diamond stars, we can do it. Don't be discouraged if you don't get any super chats. You're respected in these streets, and we appreciate so Jamaica. But people are going to do. I appreciate it. Look, there's some people that can't afford it, and they don't have it. If you can't afford it and you don't have it, man, enjoy it. Just share everything with your friends as best you can on your social media platforms. Do what you can. If you don't have it, man, that's fine. Good. Enjoy it. I love everybody, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to watch it and hanging out with me here. So people do what they can do, and I appreciate that. Sparky, but Garland, what about the Marquis of Queensbury? Yeah, the old Queensbury rules. Yeah, I don't think the Russians are going by the Queensbury rules. That's for sure. How about this? Brazilian relatives overheard Lula's doctors lamenting Lula not following instructions to recover from his throat cancer, concluding he'd be a short timer. Prudent to read up on VP Geraldo Alckmin. Well, and he's in his 70s, so let's hope for the best for Lula. But yeah, good idea. Thank you very much. Brilliant, man. I got a lot of smart people here. Thank you. I'll look up on that. Alex Shirazi, thanks a lot. T-Mac. Wow, Tracy McGrady, famous NBA player. T-Mac, thanks. Super sticker. Appreciate that. That, I think, might be everybody. Thanks everybody over on Rockfin. By the way, we got somebody else, and that is Plato's Beard says, one of my best commentators on YouTube. Thanks a lot, Plato. Certainly appreciate it. Everybody, don't forget tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. the one and only Scott Ritter will be here. I'll be on the left lens with Danny Haifong tonight at 8 p.m. I'm going to do 6 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Pacific time, KPFK 90.7 in Los Angeles today. I will be on there. I'm doing my LA show today. That got moved from Mondays to Tuesdays. What else? Anything else? Oh, by the way, just a reminder, everything you see, Patreon, if you can do $1 or $3 or $1 million a month, whatever you can do is highly appreciated. PayPal, if you don't want to do PayPal because it's a neoliberal operation, buymeacoffee.com/Garland and of course, Cash App. Anything you can do to help the channel keep going is certainly appreciated. And Rockfin, you know what happened with Twitter. I'm persona non grata on Twitter, but there could maybe I'll put it like this. I'm there in spiritually, though maybe not in physical form. That's right. Garland Nixon's Ghost. Look it up on Twitter. We'll see what's going to happen with that. And Rockfin, having been ghosted on Twitter, it reminds me again, I could be thrown off at YouTube on any given day, and you know it. So if so, make sure you go to my Rockfin channel, ROKFIN.com, rockfin.com / Garland Nixon. Go there and become a member. It costs nothing. It's free to become a member on my Rockfin channel, and you'll see almost everything I have. However, let me add this. It's your choice. Again, if you can't afford it, don't worry about it. Enjoy everything. Just share what you can. If you can afford it, Rockfin is a free speech platform with no advertisements. And if you can become a subscriber, it's $9.99 a month to become a subscriber. If you do that for an entire year, they give you 2 months free. And so if you can become a subscriber on Rockfin, I really appreciate that. Anybody that can do that, you can sign up through my channel. It helps keep Rockfin going, keeps the channel strong. $9.99 a month. I appreciate that. If you can't, don't worry about it. If you can't afford it, just enjoy everything. What that gives you, if you become a subscriber, you can anywhere on Rockfin. All of Rockfin creators do at least one premium show per month, and you got to be a subscriber per week, a subscriber. I do one. That's my weekly with Scott Ritter from 9 to 10. I do most of that on all of my platforms, and about the last 40 minutes or so will be part of the premium channel. That's the only thing that I do premium weekly at this point on Rockfin. But if you can afford the $9.99 a month for Rockfin, great. I appreciate it. That really helps keep the free speech platform going. If you can't, sign up for free. You're going to see 99.9% of my stuff. And if they toss me off YouTube, we'll be there. So I just like to let everybody know, be completely open and honest with you. Do what you can. If you can't afford it, man, don't spend money that you can't afford. Spend it on your family. Thank you very much. One more, and that is Terry Toro super sticker. Thank you very much. And that's it. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Peace. I'm out.